I'm Jodie, I'm a maker from the northwest of England, and I'm here today to talk to you about my Make 9 and my general knitting goals for 2026. In terms of the structure of today's video, I'm first going to talk to you about my Make 9, so my list of 9 specific patterns that I'd like to get to this year. And then I'm also going to go over the 16 additional just general knitting goals that I've got for the year as well. I've seen a lot of people on Instagram putting the images of their Make 9 with the sort of 16 boxes around the perimeter of it. And I really like the way that that visual looks. And I also like the idea of setting sort of specific patterns that I'd like to get to this year, as well as just some general knitting intentions. This is the first year I'm doing a Make 9. I think previously when I've looked at the format, I found it a little bit restrictive, and I've thought, oh, you know, I don't really want to sit here in January and plan out quite a hefty percentage of the projects that I'm going to be doing throughout the year right now, and then set out sort of like a rigid plan for myself. But as we get through the more general goals, I think you'll see that one of the things that I'm looking at doing this year is around stash busting and reducing the amount of yarn in my yarn stash. And I actually thought that a Make 9 might be a really sensible thing to do if I've already got yarn in my stash and I'm already thinking about what I might be wanting to do with that, setting some quite specific intentions for, oh, I've got this yarn and what can I make from that. And when I've been going through making my Make 9, I've really thought about stash first in terms of what those projects could be and what things to add to that list. I think I'm making quite good progress with my Make 9 so far this year. As I'm sitting down to record this video, it is the 9th of February, and I've already completed the first project on my Make 9, and I've actually cast on a second project from that list as well. The first project on my Make 9 is the baby bear bonnet, and I have actually already completed this. Now, this was a gift for a friend whose baby turned 1 recently, so that was sort of part of their birthday present. And unfortunately, because it was a present, it has already left my house now. So I don't have the physical object here to show you, but I can insert a picture. I think I'm going to end up making quite a few of these this year because they're an absolutely fantastic stash buster. I made the second to largest size in the pattern, and I think it used 37 grams of yarn, so really not that much at all. And as I am working through my stash this year, I think I'm going to get quite a lot of sort of sub 1 skein quantities left, where I think I might be able to eke out maybe like the smallest size or maybe the second smallest size out of this. If the second largest size only used 37 grams, I would imagine that you'd probably get one of the smaller sizes out of even half a skein. So I think that's going to be a really good pattern to have in my library in this year where I'm trying to stash down, especially because quite a lot of the yarn that's currently in my stash is acrylic yarn that I bought when I first started knitting, and it's not something that I would use for myself for like a garment or an accessory anymore. For those sorts of things, I do tend to stick to natural fibres, but I do still keep that acrylic in my stash because I do make a lot of baby gifts, and I think there's a lot of value in having something in your stash that is machine washable, is quite easy to care for, is soft to the touch, because I think those are really nice qualities to have in a yarn that you're going to use to make something for a baby. The second pattern on my Make 9 this year is the Manu cardigan, and I have already cast this on. Now, this is part of a family of patterns. I think there's a cardigan, a jumper, a t-shirt, and maybe even a camisole or something, some sort of summer weight garment. Honestly, I like them all. I possibly would make the t-shirt as well. But yeah, so I have already cast this on, and I am using Drops Nord in the shade Red, and I'm holding that double. In the original pattern, I think it recommends to use a lace weight held with a fingering weight, so like a fingering weight wool with a mohair really. I do like how that fabric looks on pictures, but I actually think in real life it's just a little bit too fuzzy. So what I've done is I've gone for something that's alpaca based, because I do think you get a light bit of fuzz on an alpaca strand, and then if you hold it 2 strands together, I think you get a nice gentle amount of fuzz that sort of replicates how a mohair garment looks in a photograph in real life, if that makes sense. So this is what I've got so far. This is just the back panel, and then you pick up for the shoulders along this line. One thing that I was surprised about with this pattern is that there's no shaping for the shoulders. This is a drop shoulder construction, and normally what you'd see with a drop shoulder is you'd either cast on for the back neck and then increase out for the shoulders in sort of a trapezoidal shape, or you would increase all of the stitches for the back neck and the shoulders and then work short rows. And this pattern didn't seem to have either of those recommendations in, so I am cautiously nervous about the fit, mainly because I'm not going to be able to tell if there's any fit issues until I've got quite a way into the pattern. Obviously with it being a drop shoulder, I'm going to need to finish the back panel and then cast on for both sides of the front. And the stitch pattern is a half brioche sort of fisherman's rib with the cables in there as well, so it's quite intensive and it takes quite a while. I think it takes me 10 minutes a row, and this is definitely over 60 rows already, so you can imagine how much time it's taken me just to do this back panel. And so the thought of getting to the end of the back panel and casting on both of the front sides and then trying it on and it not fitting very well in the shoulders does make me a little bit nervous. Second project on my Make 9 in progress. The next pattern on my Make 9 is the Staffing Sweater Kids. Now I'm really pleased that Rebecca Clow has released a children's version of this. When the original Staffing Sweater was in development, I was absolutely obsessed with the texture, and I was a little bit upset to see that it was an Aran weight garment, because that's not really something that I would get value out of. Really, I much prefer sort of fingering weight to DK at the absolute sort of heaviest, to be a practical everyday garment for me. Really loved the texture, was a little bit gutted that it wasn't really ultimately something that was going to work for me. I know she has now released a Staffing Sweater Light, or a Staffing t-shirt is it? Ultimately I think it's a DK weight version of the same garment, and that is something that I'm interested in, but I think it's fallen a little bit further down my list. I was really pleased when she released the kid sweater, because I really like making kids garments. I think they're really quick and really satisfying, and like I say, I've got that acrylic stash going on this year that I'm trying to stash down through, so welcoming some extra kids garment options into my pattern library feels like a really good idea. And again, with my stash down goals in mind, I thought that putting a kids garment on here would be a really good idea to try and get through some of that acrylic stash. So Staffing Sweater Kids. The next pattern on my Make 9 is the December Bow by Petite Knit, and I've been wanting to make one of these for absolutely ages, but I just never get around to it. When I get to Christmas knitting, I tend to go, oh well, you know, I'm not going to gift knit this year, and I always end up last minute Larry making a million gifts for everybody. I think last year I made something like 10, and I'd gone into the Christmas season thinking that I was going to make 2, and 8 of those came onto my list in November. So again, like, not very good with planning out Christmas knits. I think I need to be a bit more realistic with myself and just accept that I do really like making gifts, and that 2 probably isn't going to be enough for me, and that I just need to sort of front load getting those prepared. I can think of at least 6 that I want to make already, so trying to get those out of the way before October so that I can do a little bit more seasonal knitting when it comes to November, December. But I would really like to make a couple of December bows for Christmas trees and just general Christmas decorations. And again, it's something really small, so I feel like as we get towards the end of the year and I'm making some progress on my stash and I'm accumulating sort of sub 50, sub 40 gram leftover bits of yarn, that would be a really good project to just get rid of those last little bits and try and get it down to, you know, the most meagre little scraps left. No specific yarns in mind. I would really like to make a red one, so what I think I'm going to do is I've got a yarn order that I need to make in the next couple of months just to sort of supplement some stuff that's in my stash, just to try and use it up a little bit more effectively. And I'm going to throw a ball of red mohair onto that list, because I think I'm going to have some leftovers hopefully from my mini cardigan that I can then hold with that mohair and make a nice little fuzzy December bow. That's the thought process anyway. The next pattern on my Make 9 is the Finest Fit socks, and they are by Lily Kate Vance of Lily Kate Makes. And essentially I just wanted a new vanilla sock recipe. I've tried a standard short row heel, I've tried an afterthought heel, and I've tried a heel flap and turn. I think regardless of what technique I use, the heel flap and turn isn't that bad, but I tend to always get, I'm not going to show you my foot, a little bit of tension over the across the top of my foot, essentially, where it feels like there's not quite enough room. I don't know if it's because I don't know anything about insteps, but a high or low instep seems to cause that, and whichever one it is, I must have that. And the Finest Fit socks are specifically designed to create a little bit more fabric in that area so that you get less tension and the sock is a little bit smoother all the way around. And I've got so many different yarns in my stash that I could use for this. Quite a lot of the fingering weight yarn in my stash is appropriate to use for socks. It's got some nylon content in there. And so what I'm thinking is that I might make some sort of scrappy, stripy Finest Fit socks with sort of fingering weight leftovers as I get through the year. Again, thinking about small quantities of yarn and how I'm going to be able to use that practically in projects where it's going to look sort of somewhat reasonable. Something that I'm really excited to get to, hopefully later on in the year as it starts to cool back down again, is the Sirius skirt. And as soon as I saw this pattern, I was absolutely obsessed, and I've actually got a really perfect yarn situation for this. So a couple of years ago, I saw that Woolly Knit were doing a sale, and I'm a bugger for not wanting to pay for shipping. And Woolly Knit have a really high threshold for free shipping, so I'd made a little bit of room in my stash, and I made a £150 order with Woolly Knit just to sort of restock up. I'd ordered a couple of their swatches and felt them and had a look at the colours, and I thought I was being really responsible really in getting those swatches. And so I ordered, I think it was 5 cones of the British wool and 1 cone of the merino. But as soon as I finished the Lanark sweater, I realised that the British wool isn't really a yarn that I'm going to get on with next to skin. The burgundy and the white I'd intended to use for a colourwork jumper for myself, and I just realised that it wasn't going to work out for that. So the 2 cones of burgundy yarn, still not really got a plan for those, but the cone of white would go great with the Sirius skirt, because actually it being a little bit toothier, I think that would be a really good quality to have on a lower half garment. And with it being a skirt, it's something that I'm always going to wear tights underneath, so the yarn's never going to be next to skin. So I've also got a couple of balls of Drops Nord in the shade black, and I'm just going to do a classic black and white, exactly the same as the sample version of that with that yarn. The next pattern on my Make 9 is the Salty Days sweater, and this is where we start to deviate from that point that I made earlier around making plans for yarns that I've already got in stash. So again, this is a pattern that's been in my queue for a really long time. I've really wanted to make it, but it just felt to me like a garment that I would never wear, because the mohair would obviously make it really, really warm, but then it's full of holes, and so it just didn't, seasonally, it just didn't seem to fit in for me anywhere. And I was actually really inspired by a version of a Salty Day sweater that aka Nora Knits made last year in sort of like a cotton yarn, and I'd never really thought about it in that sense before. It was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. And so I've got 2 possible options here, and they're both the same yarn, it's more just the colour. So in my stash, and I've spoken about this before, I've got an obscene amount of Drop Spell in the shade Navy that I bought for a dress that I crocheted, and then when I finished it, it was too big for me. And it was a floor length crochet dress, and I think it used something like 25 balls of yarn, so I've got quite a lot left. I've made a couple of projects using what I'd bought for that, but I've still got quite a bit left over. But when I think about this sweater, I just think about it in white. I just think in terms of the ways that I would wear it, I think I would get more wear out of it if it was white. Now I do have 3 skeins of Drop Spell in white in my stash, but that wouldn't be enough obviously to make the jumper, so I would need to supplement with more of the white yarn to do that. I think that's the way that I'm leaning, and I'll need to find another project for that navy yarn. I've actually seen the tester call for the Nosty Tea by the Creator Bayout. Sadly didn't get accepted onto that test knit, but really interested in that pattern, and I think that's a pattern that I would more likely wear in the navy, so I'm thinking that's possibly how that's going to work. This project's a bit of a weird one in terms of communicating it out to you, because the official pattern on Ravelry is the anemone sweater, but the version that I want to make doesn't look anything like the anemone sweater. So essentially what's happened with this idea is somebody has combined the anemone sweater with a colourwork sock pattern that's got tulips on it, and essentially has made what I'm going to call the tulip sweater. Similar to the anemone sweater, it's got sort of stripes of flowers across it, and it's a drop shoulder, but it's got the tulip pattern on instead of the sort of more circular flowers of the anemone sweater. And I also think I'm going to copy most of her yarn choices, because as soon as I saw the anemone sweater, I knew I wanted to make it in Drops Nord, because it's one of my favourite yarns to use for sweaters. It's really nice and soft next to skin, and I like that it's a fingering weight that's a sock yarn. So if you do have scraps, it's quite easy to figure out what to do with the leftovers, because you've just got more options. You can either hold them together to make a DK weight, to use a DK weight sort of leftovers project, or you can also hold them individually and use them in like scrappy socks, colourwork socks, that sort of thing. So I knew I wanted to make it in Drops Nord, and lo and behold, the person who made the original version had also used Drops Nord in the red colour, in the dusty pink, in one of the yellows, the leafy green colour. The background of the sweater is the white, and then the only colour from her sample that's not Drops Nord is that sort of electric blue, and I think she uses Drops Daisy for that. Now what I'm thinking is Drops Daisy is a DK weight yarn, and I don't have that in stash. So I'm thinking I might use Drops Baby Merino in that same electric blue, just because that's a sport weight, and I think that's probably going to be closer gauge wise to the Drops Nord. But in terms of making this project, I did already have a couple of extra balls of the red yarn, because when I bought the yarn for my Minot cardigan, I accidentally read the yarn quantities incorrectly and ordered 2 skeins more than I needed. We had some leftover of the sort of mustardy yellow colour of Drops Nord in my stash from when I made a hat for my partner, and I have since ordered the pink and the green shades of the Drops Nord. So in terms of the colours for the flowers and the leaves, I've got everything but the blue potentially, and so I would just need to supplement that with a background colour. So again, that's going to be a project that, although it's a whole sweater and technically it could take like 10 to 13 skeins out of my stash, it's probably going to take more like 4 or 5 skeins out of my stash, and I'm going to need to supplement it with something to get that used up. And then the final pattern in my Make 9 is the Forever Unicorn sweater, and again it's one that has been in my queue for ages. I've really wanted to make it, and I was actually going to cast this on last year, but I focused too heavily on stash busting and I didn't really think about how I would want the garment to actually look. And so in my stash at the minute I've got, I think it was 5.5 skeins of Drops Air, which is the recommended yarn for this pattern I believe, in the light grey shade. And in the end I decided to buy a ball of like a strawberry, I think it's called strawberry pink, like a really light pink colour. And so what I was going to do is a grey background with a pink unicorn. Now what I've decided on since is that I really wanted a white unicorn, and I think this is like a bit of a perspective change for me. I bought that pink skein to go with the grey, thinking I just want to use as much of that grey as I possibly can, and so I'm gonna make a sweater that's not necessarily what I would have envisioned, just to use that yarn up. And I really don't want to do that. As part of slashing down, I really want to focus on how can I use this yarn in a way that I would be really happy with. And so I've actually decided to go back to the drawing board, and again in a yarn order that I'm going to make later on this year, I'm going to use that pink as the background colour, so I'm going to need to supplement that with another couple of balls, so hopefully I won't have any issues with dial-ups, and get a white yarn for the unicorn. And I've decided on another project to make with the grey yarn. So that's my Make 9, and I'm now going to move on to some more sort of general loose knitting goals, where I've not got a specific project in mind, but I've got sort of a specific thing I'm hoping to achieve. Again, I think I'm making pretty good progress with these. There's a couple that I've already ticked off, and there's another couple that I'm either in the process of doing or that I've got some concrete plans as to how I'm going to do that. So general goal number 1 is revisit an old project. I've actually already done this. So historically I've seen people do the frog finish fix February. Now I've really honed in on this, and I'm just going to call it Fix It February for me, and I'm going to do an update on how Fix It February has gone for me at the end of the month. But essentially there was, I think, 4 projects I identified that I'd finish, and there was specific things that were making me not gravitate to them. So one was a jumper that I made for my partner last year, and it ended up being too short for him, so I've had to go in and lengthen it, and just things like that. So going back to old projects and fixing them up essentially. Goal number 2 is to frog something that I don't use. I do have a specific project in mind for this. I made a mohair cardigan for my sister's wedding last year, and the weather was actually really nice for a wedding, so I didn't end up wearing it. And it's not really a style that I would use day to day. Not really looking forward to frogging it, because I did make it using 2 strands of mohair held together, and so ripping that out is going to be an absolute nightmare. But I am hoping to recycle that yarn, because I've got a sort of semi-sweaters quantity of a similarly coloured fingering weight strand that, if I manage to harvest the yarn from the cardigan, I could probably hold those 2 yarns together to make a full sweater. So wish me luck with that one. My next goal is to make 4 gifts. As I've already established, I love gift knitting, and again, I've already made decent progress on this. Goal number 4 is to crochet a garment. Now with crochet, I never put specific patterns for garments, because pretty much everything that I crochet in terms of wearables is done like freestyle. Goal number 5 is make a scrappy project. So when I say a scrappy project, I mean like a multicolored project. I think that's what I'd prefer. Goal number 6, I'd like to reuse a pattern this year. I am one of these people who's quite bad for seeing a launch of a pattern that I really like, buying it and then maybe losing interest in it or falling out of love with it, or just generally whatever reason not to actually cast that project on in the end. And so I'd like to go back through my pattern library and reuse some patterns that I've already used and use some of the ones that are in there that I've not used yet. Number 7 is make a cami, and I flip-flopped back and forward on this because I did have a couple of different camis on my Make 9, and I ultimately decided that I wasn't married to any specific cami pattern enough to put it on my Make 9, but I knew that I wanted to make at least a cami this year. I think I've got 3 or 4 quantities of yarn that would be big enough for a camisole, and so again, stashed down, I really want to get through those quantities, so I am going to need to make a couple of those. I think the problem that I've got when it comes to a pattern is I know exactly which one I want to make, and it is it's either the camisole number 7 or camisole number 9 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, but she is famously non-inclusive on her sizing, and it's by choice. I've had a couple of her patterns. I've knit I think it's sweater number 15, the one with all the cables on the front, the really sort of regular pattern. And I've also knit, again, I can never remember the numbers, so I really don't like the naming system that she uses, but I think it's cami number 2 or number 4, the one with the broken rib. Really nice. But the size range is limited, so I think on the camisole pattern I might have needed to knit either the biggest size or the second biggest size. I'm not a slim woman by any shop, but I am a straight size woman. I don't shop in sort of specialist shops for clothing. If I walk into a shop on the high street, most of the time I'm not going to struggle to get into something. So if I'm knitting the largest size in a pattern, I think that that's not great on the size inclusivity front, but it also really limits me as a maker. So even if I didn't think about a size inclusivity from the point of view of people in larger bodies than me wanting to make stuff, the amount of patterns that I've bought where I've not been able to hit the right gauge, and so to accommodate for that I've just gone up or down a size in the pattern. I can't do that with My Favourite Things knitwear patterns because I am the largest size in them, and so I find it limiting for me as a maker, even as someone who's straight size, because I can't necessarily muck around with the pattern in the way that I would like to. I've seen that camisole, I really like it. I can't get the design out of my head, and I've not really found something that's similar enough. I think there is one by Knitting for Olive. I think, is it Pernille Larsen who designs for Knitting for Olive? She released a pattern called, I think it's called the Y top, and the size range is better on that. I still don't think it's perfect from memory, but it's a lot better than the My Favourite Things knitwear, and it's a rib, so it's not a broken rib, but that's a really easy adjustment in terms of changing something from rib to broken rib. And then I think the increases are slightly different, but again, I think I'm advanced enough a knitter that I could probably riff off that pattern and make something that looks a little bit more like the My Favourite Things one. Maybe that's a bit petty of me that I wouldn't buy the pattern, but I would buy a similar enough pattern and then tweak it to look like that finished object. Is that an ethical grey area of like, I've seen this pattern from a designer, I don't agree with their ethics, I don't think the pattern would work for me, but I probably have the resources to make it without buying that pattern. My 8th just general goal is to make a blanket. Again, underway with this. My most recent crochet cast on is a crochet baby blanket, which would meet this one. Goal number 9 is to make a hood, and this is sort of similar to the make a cami one, where I knew I definitely wanted to make a hood this year, but I just haven't settled on a pattern. I've had a look at a few and there's not really any that are really singing to me, and so what I think I'm probably going to end up doing is just freestyling one. Goal number 10 is to knit stripes. I think with my knit stripes I'll probably make a sibling sweater by Laura Penrose, and the reason that this didn't make it onto my Make 9 is that I was really committed to actually finishing everything on my Make 9, and I just wasn't sure if I was going to get around to knitting a stripy sweater on top of all of the other plans that I've got for this year. Stripy sweater would be something that I would want to make for myself, and so I think I need to prioritise like some of the other projects. Goal number 11 is make a headband. Are we sensing a theme? I know I definitely want to make a headband. I've definitely got some yarn in my stash that would be great to make a headband out of. I just haven't settled on a specific pattern yet. Goal number 12 is to knit outside. I don't think this will be a difficult one for me. I do manage to knit outside most years, but it's just something that I always want to be aware of. I think when your hobbies are like mine, I quite like sewing, I like knitting, I like crocheting, I like reading. And most of those are things that you would typically do inside, but you technically can do outside. And I suppose it's just making sure that it's something that's front of mind for me to spend more time outside where I can, because I'm conscious that a lot of the hobbies that I have are primarily something that you would think to do indoors. Goal number 13, I've got visit a new yarn shop. Again, I think I'm on it with this one. I haven't been to a new yarn shop this year yet, but I have got a trip to London planned in the next few months. And as part of that, I'm hoping to get to Beautiful Knitters. Linked to the goal to visit a new yarn shop, I'd like to try a new yarn that I've not used before. So maybe stepping a little bit outside of my stash goals here, but I am still welcoming new yarn into my stash. I just want to work through it quicker than I'm welcoming it in. Goal number 15 is a yarn no buy month. So again, thinking about those stash goals, I just like at least 1 month where, although I'm not on a no buy for anything this year, I would like at least 1 month where I'm not bringing any new yarn in, just to help me move through it. I think when I buy yarn in, again, thinking about the shipping thing, I don't tend to buy like a ball here and a ball there. I tend to buy like 10 to 20 balls at a time. And so if I'm consuming at that rate, I'm going to need to have a couple of months throughout the year where I'm not buying any yarn. Otherwise, I'm buying it quicker than I can use it. And then my final goal for the year is to reduce my yarn stash by 2,026 grams. I really liked seeing these challenges from other people where they set their yarn stash down goal based on the year and like sort of match it up with the year that way. And I also think it's a really achievable way to do it for me. If I was to set myself a total yarn ban this year, I could definitely get through way more than 2,026 grams of yarn this year. But just thinking about that sort of sustainability angle of, I don't want to just get rid of yarn for getting rid of its sake. I want to use it in a way that I'll enjoy. I want to take the emphasis off reducing my yarn stash as quickly as I possibly can, and I want to reduce my yarn stash in a way that's sustainable and creative and fun for me. So I didn't want to set something too lofty, because I thought that that would encourage me to then make small projects with heavier weight yarns, things that are less practical that I'm not going to use. And I'd rather set a less ambitious goal and make it so that I can still bring yarn in to use stuff out. So if I've got like that 3 skeins of drop spell, like there's not really a project that I can think of that would use that 3 skeins of drop spell that I'd be really happy with. When I originally bought it, I was going to make like a waistcoat, and I'm not really interested in making that anymore. I wouldn't be able to make anything much more substantial than that. I might be able to make a bag out of it, but realistically I don't think I'd use a bag if I did that. And so I'd rather have a goal that allows me to buy way more yarn than I've already got. You know, if I've already got 3 in and I'm going to need to buy another 6 or 7 balls to make the project, I'm actually buying twice the amount of yarn that I've got to use it up, but then I'm going to end up with a finished object that I'm really happy with and that I'm going to use. And I'd also like to hit that goal before the end of the year, so I don't want to be sort of scratching around in December trying to hit that. So thinking about that stash down goal, to keep myself accountable, I do want to put a few things here. I went through absolutely everything, weighed everything, and so if it had a ball band on it, I counted it as whatever weight was on the ball band. So I know if you buy a 100 gram skein, it's not necessarily going to be 100 grams, it might be 102 grams. But if it's a full skein with a band on it, I've just assumed that it is exactly the way that it says it is. If it's a partial skein that didn't have a band on it, I have actually weighed it and got the exact sort of precise measurements for it. And I started the year this year with 15,813 grams of yarn in my yarn stash. When I first started thinking about goals this year, I did think, wouldn't it be great if I could get that stash under 10 kilos? And I think that that would be a great goal. I just don't know how achievable that that would be, given the way that I'm looking to get yarn out of my stash. And so again, would really like to get that number down, and primarily because the storage solution that I've got isn't suitable anymore. I've got a set of drawers that I like to keep my yarn in. The yarn doesn't fit in the drawers anymore, and so I think if I could get it below that 10 kilos, I think it would then comfortably fit in the storage solution that I've got. And I would like the drawers to contain everything knitting related, so needles, yarn, blocking mats, wool wash, sort of everything that I need, buttons, you know, you name it, everything that comes along with knitting. And at the minute that's just not cutting it. My blocking mats don't fit in there, half of my active projects don't fit in there, the yarn for the next few projects that I'm going to cast on doesn't fit in there. I've got a couple of boxes here, there and everywhere really. So like I say, I started the year on 15,813 grams. I am going to do sort of quarterly check-ins with my stash. But here's where we are currently. So we started with 15,813 grams. Currently, I have 16,811 grams. Now you might notice that that is nearly a whole kilo heavier than we started. And that is to do with, like I say, I'm not on a yarn ban. And so to try and get through a few things, I am buying a little bit of yarn to work through some stuff. I have bought one sweater's quantity that has ultimately contributed to that being a lot higher than it started, that I didn't need to buy, that isn't to bring something down. But I'm trying not to be too stringent with the rules, or like ultimately this is a hobby, it's something that I do because I enjoy it, and so I don't want to put too many rules around it and then not enjoy the hobby anymore. So I am still allowed to make some sort of frivolous purchases that aren't necessarily in keeping with that stash down goal. And I suppose the one thing that I'm thinking about when I am buying yarn, even though I haven't got rules in place, is that I would like to use any yarn that I buy this year in this year, like barring sort of remnants and scraps and things like that. So if I've bought a sweater's quantity, if I've bought 13 balls of yarn that I intend to use to make a sweater, I need to make that sweater this year. And so I'm not just thinking, oh, is this nice yarn that I would like to make a sweater out of? It's, is this nice yarn that I would like to make a sweater out of this year? So yeah, that was my Make 9 and my general knitting goals for the year. If you've made a Make 9 or if you've got some general goals, I'd love to know what you're doing in the comments below. I'd love to hear about what patterns you're making, and I'd really like to know if you are stashing down this year and what rules you've put in place around a stash down if you are doing. So if you let me know. And other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.